20 of our friends stood in my backyard, a space I designed myself. They were drinking the beer from my cooler and eating the food I was cooking. They all watched my wife and my best friend exchange a look of private ownership, and they said absolutely nothing because they had been watching this for over a year. I am an architect, a man whose entire career is built on seeing structural weaknesses. I can spot a faulty load-bearing wall from 100 feet away, yet I was the last person to understand the complete and total rot in my own home. That afternoon, just before it all went wrong, I felt a deep sense of peace. The late summer sun was perfect, casting long shadows across the lawn. The music was low, the conversation was a familiar and comforting hum. This was the life I had built, brick by brick, over 2 decades of hard work. It was stable, it was secure, it was everything a man is told to want. I felt a surge of genuine, uncomplicated happiness standing there at the grill. I was a happy, oblivious idiot, a king presiding over his perfect counterfeit kingdom. I turned from the rising smoke, ready to say something forgettable about the burgers. That's when the silence descended on all of us. It wasn't a lull in conversation. It was a vacuum that sucked all the air out. It was a heavy, suffocating blanket of shared knowledge that I was not privy to. I saw Dave, a man whose deck I helped design, suddenly study a loose thread on his shorts. Maria, whose hand Sarah held through a miscarriage, abruptly turned to scold her child for nothing. Every single person performed a small, desperate act of looking away, but my eyes were locked on Sarah and Mark. He had said something to her, and she was smiling. It was not a smile for me or for the party. It was a smile of deep, weary intimacy, a secret language I could not speak. It was a look that said they inhabited a world completely separate from mine. And then, as quickly as it came, the moment was gone. The noise rushed back in, too loud and too cheerful, a frantic attempt to patch the hole, but I had seen it, I had felt it. I am a man who understands foundations, and in that awful, silent moment, I finally felt the catastrophic tremor deep beneath my feet. The entire structure of my life was a lie, and it was beginning to collapse. After that barbecue, I spent weeks trying to unsee what I saw. I told myself that long marriages and even longer friendships have strange moments. I convinced myself that I was the one with the problem. I was an architect obsessed with perfect angles in a world that is naturally flawed. So I tried to just keep going to restore the comfortable blueprint of our lives. Our life on paper was the American dream realized over 20 years. We had the house I designed, the 2 cars, the annual vacations. Sarah and I met in college, and Mark was my roommate. He was the best man at our wedding, the one who gave a funny, heartfelt speech. He was the architect of our social lives, always planning dinners and group trips. When Sarah and I would argue, Mark was always the mediator. He would listen patiently to both sides, offering measured, reasonable advice. He would tell me to give her space and tell her that I was under a lot of stress. We saw him as the reliable anchor in our shared world. Now, looking back, I can see his advice was always about creating distance between us. He was a demolition expert disguised as a marriage counselor. The warning signs were all there, screaming at me in hindsight. Sarah started taking more solo trips to visit her sister. She would come back seeming refreshed, but also more distant than ever. She started a book club that met twice a month, always at night. There were more and more inside jokes between her and Mark. They would reference things with a quick glance, and I was always the outsider. I once asked what was so funny, and they just said it was stupid. They made me feel foolish for even wanting to be included. I chalked it all up to the normal erosion of a long-term relationship. I chose to believe the easy lies because the truth was simply unthinkable. The house was standing, the lights were on, so I never thought to check the foundation. I was living in a beautiful condemned building, admiring the paint while the support beams rotted away. The breaking point didn't happen in our home. It happened a month after the barbecue at a dinner party. We were at the home of our friends, Mike and Anna. There were only 8 of us, a smaller, more intimate group. I remember feeling a constant low-grade tension in the room. The laughter was sharp, and the smiles felt like they were nailed in place. I was trying to pretend that everything was fine, to be the person I was before, but I was hyper aware of every interaction in that dining room. I watched the way Mark would subtly angle his body towards Sarah. I noticed how Anna avoided making eye contact with me for too long. Mike had recently started dating a woman named Chloe. She was new to our group, an outsider who did not know the rules. She didn't understand the intricate web of secrets we were all caught in. We were talking about winter vacation plans and ski trips. Chloe, trying to be friendly, turned to Sarah with a bright smile. She asked if Sarah and Mark were planning another one of their little getaways. She said Mike had told her they were practically inseparable travel buddies. The words hung in the air, clear and undeniable and horrific. In an instant, the entire table fell into a profound, deathly silence. The sound of a fork scraping a plate seemed as loud as an explosion. Mike looked at his new girlfriend with an expression of pure, unadulterated panic. Anna closed her eyes for a brief second, as if in prayer or pain. Sarah's face became a perfect, impenetrable mask of polite confusion. She did not look at Mark, and, more importantly, she did not look at me. My own body felt like it was miles away from my brain. The wine in my glass might as well have been poison. The illusion of control I had carefully rebuilt over the last month shattered. I felt the floor drop out from under me. I didn't say a word. I just stood up from the table. I couldn't breathe the air in that room for another second. The car ride home from the dinner party was completely silent. The silence was a living thing. A third passenger in the car with us. It was heavy with accusation, denial, and 20 years of shared history. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, to break something. Instead, I just focused on the white lines of the road. When we got home, I tried to fix it, to find a rational explanation. I asked her about Chloe's comment, my voice sounding weak and unsteady. I told her that the reaction from everyone at the table was strange. I gave her a chance to explain it all away as a stupid misunderstanding. Sarah did not take that chance. She went on the attack instead. She accused me of creating a scene and humiliating her in front of our friends. She said Chloe was a naive girl who twisted a simple friendship into something ugly. She masterfully turned my fear and suspicion into a weapon against me. She claimed my recent paranoia was pushing her away from me. She wanted to know how I could think something so vile about her. She used our 2 decades of marriage as a shield and a cudgel. The conversation was a masterclass in emotional manipulation. I went to bed that night feeling confused and deeply ashamed. I felt guilty for doubting her, for making a scene, for being suspicious. The next morning I called Mark, hoping my best friend would give me clarity. He just laughed it off, a cold and hollow sound. He said I was working too hard and letting stress get the best of me. He expressed deep disappointment that I would let a silly rumor damage our friendship. He told me I owed Sarah a massive apology for my behavior. He made me feel like I was a fool, a paranoid husband losing his grip on reality. They were both telling me the same story with the same calm conviction. My gut was screaming that something was wrong, but my head was reeling. They made me believe I was the one who had betrayed our trust. I was the architect who was condemning a perfectly good building for no reason at all. The weeks after the gaslighting were a special kind of hell. I lived inside a thick fog of self-doubt, constantly questioning my own perceptions. I would watch Sarah and Mark interact at group events, searching for clues. They were perfect, acting like casual and distant old friends. Their performance was so flawless that I almost believed them again. I felt like I was the one creating the tension, the unstable element, but a small, hard part of my brain refused to let it go. The feeling that something was deeply wrong was a low hum beneath the surface of my life. The breaking point came from a simple, stupid lie. Sarah said she was going to a late movie with Anna. I happened to talk to Mike later that evening about a work matter. He casually mentioned he and Anna were at home watching a game. The lie was so pointless, so easily disproven, that it snapped me out of my confusion. That night, after she was asleep, I went to my office downstairs. My hands were shaking as I logged into our shared phone account. I opened the detailed billing statement, and the fog instantly evaporated. It was replaced by a cold, sickening, and undeniable clarity. There were hundreds of calls and texts between her phone and Mark's. We were talking about thousands of messages exchanged over the last year. They talked late at night after I was asleep. They talked for hours on the days she was supposedly visiting her sister. I then logged into our credit card accounts. I found hotel charges from towns just an hour away. The dates matched her book club nights perfectly. I found restaurant receipts for 2 people on days she told me she was having a solo lunch. It was all there in black and white, a meticulous blueprint of their betrayal. Every lie, every secret trip, every stolen moment was documented. I felt the truth in my gut, but now I held the proof. I sat there in the dark for hours, just staring at the screen. The doubt was gone, and so was the guilt. All that was left was the enormous, crushing weight of the truth. I had not acted yet, but the stakes had just risen astronomically. For 3 days, I lived with the evidence locked in my office drawer. I went to work, I had dinner with my wife, I functioned. But it was all a performance, a hollow imitation of my former life. The confusion and self-doubt were gone, replaced by something cold and hard. I was an architect reviewing a failed project, analyzing every point of collapse. I knew I couldn't live with the quiet poison of this knowledge forever. The turning point required a confrontation, a definitive act of courage. It had to be done on my terms, in the house that I built. I called Mark and asked him to come over to look at some new blueprints. He agreed without hesitation, the perfect helpful friend to the very end. He arrived that evening, and I led him into the living room where Sarah was reading. They greeted each other with the casual warmth of old friends. I let the facade hang in the air for a moment before I calmly walked over to the coffee table. I placed a thick folder on it and opened it for them both to see. Inside were the phone records, with every call between them highlighted in yellow. Next to that were the credit card statements with the hotel and restaurant charges circled in red. I didn't shout, I didn't accuse, I just presented the data. My voice was steady, like I was discussing a zoning issue. I pointed to a hotel charge from a month ago. I asked Sarah if her book club had started meeting in roadside motels. I asked Mark if our friendship included sleeping with my wife. There was no more gaslighting, no more room for them to maneuver. The hard evidence pinned them in place, stripping away all their lies. Sarah's face crumbled, the mask of indifference finally gone. Mark just stared at the papers, his mouth slightly open, completely defeated. In that moment, watching them, I felt the last remnants of my love for them die. It wasn't anger anymore, just a vast, empty space where my life used to be. I had finally confronted reality, and it was uglier than I imagined. I told them both to get out of my house. After they left, a new kind of silence filled the house. It was not the tense silence of a kept secret, but the vast, empty silence of an ending. Sarah returned the next morning while I was at work. She took her clothes, her personal items, and a few pieces of art. She did not leave a note. She did not send a text message. She simply excised herself from my life with the clean, efficient precision of a surgeon. Her indifference was a final, brutal confirmation of the truth. Our marriage had been a hollow structure for a very long time. The consequences rippled outward, and my phone became the epicenter of the fallout. The first few messages were cowardly and vague. People sent texts saying they were sorry to hear about the drama. They hoped I was doing okay, a meaningless and hollow sentiment. They offered no support, they took no sides, they simply wanted to seem polite. Then came the messages of blame, which were far more honest. Mike, whose girlfriend had exposed the secret, accused me of being cruel. He said I had no right to humiliate Sarah and Mark like that. He was not angry about the affair, only about its messy revelation. Anna sent a single text telling me that some things are better left unsaid. They were all blaming me for shattering the comfortable lie they had all agreed to live with. Most of our friends, however, chose the loudest reaction of all: pure silence. They did not call, they did not write, they simply vanished. They sided with the affair by refusing to acknowledge my own pain. In the space of 24 hours, my entire social world evaporated. Every friendship was revealed to be a fragile facade built on convenience instead of loyalty. My world had shifted irrevocably, leaving me completely and totally isolated. I was an architect standing in the ruins of a building he had designed. After a week of living in the wreckage, something inside me changed. The grief and the shock had burned away, leaving something harder in their place. It was a cold, clear, and focused rage. I stopped looking for answers or trying to understand their betrayal. Understanding was a luxury for people who still had something left to save. I had nothing. Their silence was not a passive act. It was an endorsement of the affair. Their accusations were a judgment on me for daring to expose the truth. I decided they were right about one thing. It was a cruel situation. So I chose to stop being the victim and start being cruel myself. This was no longer about finding peace. It was about taking back a measure of power. I was an architect who knew the structural secrets of every house in the neighborhood. I spent an entire night going through old emails and messages on my computer. I was not looking for memories, I was looking for ammunition. My first target was Mike, the friend who had called me cruel for confronting Sarah. I knew for a fact that Mike had a significant gambling problem. He had borrowed money from me twice to cover losses he hid from Anna. I found an old email chain where he begged me for the loan. He wrote about his fear and his shame with brutal honesty. I composed a new email to Anna, his wife. I told her I was cleaning out my old files and came across this. I said I thought she had been included on the original message. I wrote that I hoped everything had worked out for them in the end. It was a perfectly polite, plausible, and utterly devastating message. It was a morally gray act of pure, calculated destruction. I hit send and felt nothing, no satisfaction, and no remorse. It was simply the first swing of the sledgehammer against a condemned building. I was no longer clearing wreckage, I was starting a demolition. The consequences of my email arrived 3 days later. It started with a furious phone call from Mike. He was not the calm, collected friend I had known for 2 decades. He was a cornered animal, spitting venom and threats down the line. He told me that Anna had left him and that his life was ruined. He said I was a vindictive monster who enjoyed destroying people. He promised that he would make me pay for what I had done. I listened to his entire tirade without saying a single word. His anger didn't touch me. It only confirmed that my actions had power. The real-world consequences he promised arrived the following week. I received a call from a major client, a developer for a lucrative project. He sounded concerned, asking if I was dealing with personal issues. He mentioned hearing rumors that I was unstable and unreliable. He had heard that my work was becoming sloppy and unfocused. I knew immediately that this was Mike's retaliation, a direct attack on my livelihood. This was the moment I became fully committed to my path. They had not only destroyed my personal life, they were now trying to dismantle my professional one. I was in too deep to turn back now, and I had no desire to. That night, I escalated my campaign from social sabotage to financial destruction. My target was no longer the periphery of the group, it was Mark. I knew that his consulting business depended almost entirely on one wealthy conservative investor. This investor was a pillar of the community, a man obsessed with family values. I gathered all the evidence I had, the phone records, the hotel bills. I created an anonymous email address. I wrote a short, simple message from the perspective of a concerned local resident. I attached the proof of the affair and sent it to the investor. I was no longer just exposing a lie between friends. I was methodically taking apart the life of the man who had destroyed mine. The tension in my chest was a tight, cold knot. I had passed the point of no return. Mark's ruin was swift and absolute. His key investor pulled all funding within a week of my anonymous email. I heard through the grapevine of a town that was now openly talking. Mark's business, his reputation, and his finances were completely gutted. He called me once, his voice a ragged whisper of disbelief and hatred. He told me I had destroyed everything he had ever built. I told him he was finally beginning to understand the basics of architecture. That was the final piece of my revenge, but it was not the end. The final blow had to be public, a definitive exit. I found the perfect opportunity a month later. It was the 25th wedding anniversary for another couple in our former friend group. I knew everyone would be there, a perfect audience for the last act. I walked into the party, and the room fell silent. It was the same silence from my barbecue, but now it was filled with fear. Mark and Sarah confronted me near the door, their faces pale and thin. Mark accused me of being a monster, while Sarah actually tried to apologize. She said we had history and that it didn't have to end this way. Her words meant nothing to me anymore. I ignored them and stepped into the center of the room. I raised my glass and addressed the entire gathering. I told them I didn't come to celebrate, but to close a chapter. I made eye contact with each person who had watched the affair unfold. I thanked them for teaching me a valuable lesson about loyalty. I said that a structure with a rotten foundation cannot be saved. It must be demolished completely to make way for something new. I told them that this was my demolition. My final act was erasing them from my life, just as they had erased me. I put my glass down, turned my back on all of them, and walked away. I did not look back. I did not wait for a reaction. It was not about healing or peace. It was simply an end. 6 months have passed since I walked out of that party. It is winter now, and a for sale sign stands in my frozen front yard. The house has been sold to a young family who knows nothing of its history. My revenge was methodical and successful, a perfect demolition of an entire world. Mark is gone, his business and his reputation in ashes. Sarah is living somewhere else, a stranger I occasionally hear about. The friends who stood by and watched are scattered and broken. I achieved everything that I set out to do, but there has been no recovery, no clear reflection, just a profound and unending silence. My phone never rings with invitations anymore. My evenings are quiet, measured, and completely empty. I have my victory, but it has brought no comfort. The anger is gone, the pain has faded, and nothing has grown in its place. Today, I walked through the empty house one last time. The rooms echoed with every footstep, amplifying the hollowness. Sunlight streamed through the bare windows, illuminating dust motes in the air. I could see the faint outlines on the walls where our pictures used to hang. I saw the indentations in the carpet where our life was once arranged. I am an architect, and I have successfully cleared the site. The flawed structure is gone, leaving a perfectly clean, empty lot. I stood in the living room where I had confronted them. I felt no satisfaction, no regret, just the quiet hum of the furnace. The final brutal truth is that I won the war completely, but victory feels exactly like standing alone in an empty house. If you enjoyed this video, support it with a like, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment with your thoughts. Your reaction helps me create new stories.